This is Tim Mackesy from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm thrilled this morning to be on with Uri Schneider from New York and the Schneider family, Phil and Uri. And our topic today will be how to help children who stutter prepare for their Bar Mitzvah or Bat Mitzvah. Something that you might not know about me is I grew up with a stutter. I first started to stutter in second grade, which is kind of late to begin. Immediately was pounced on by peers in my school, being teased and bullied, laughed at. My stuttering quickly escalated, and I've had it since. I've gone from like a severe stutter to more of a mild stutter. I've taken a keen interest in bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs being here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've helped no less than 20 children to get ready for theirs, and I've been to about 10. And seeing children who want to speak more smoothly with less effort and feel comfortable for this special day, I kind of reflect back on myself, who as a child had difficulty being in front of a classroom, any book report, any oral report, anything. So as we talk, we're going to talk about the important ways to get prepared for a bar and bat and what happens during one as we assist children. So thank you very much for being on this morning, Uri. Please take over.
Hey, it's a real pleasure, Tim. Thanks for this opportunity, and big fan of your work and listening to your conversations here. And it's an honor to join you this morning on this important topic.
Thank you. You want to tell us a little bit about the importance of a bar and bat for the children?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love how you're so locked in and down with the lingo, and it just shows that someone that's quote unquote an outsider can really take the interest, as you said, and become as versed and as necessary to be an insider. And there was recently a beautiful series, if anyone's interested, inside look into the Hasidic community by a filmmaker called Peter Santinello. But for anybody that's interested, I think Tim's talking about a bar and bat mitzvah. It's a life cycle event for any Jewish child, any Jewish family that observes some semblance of their Jewish rituals. One of the things that many people do is the Hanukkah candles. Another one is the Passover Seder. And a big one is this rite of passage when a child is 12 or 13. It's this moment of transition into being a full-fledged member of the tribe. And there are all different kinds of ways to observe it. So there are different denominations in America. There's people who identify with Reform Judaism. There are those that identify with conservative. There are those that identify with Orthodox. And there's kind of a spectrum and fluid spectrum in between. But all have this rite of passage moment. And some call it a bar mitzvah for boys, a bat mitzvah for girls. Some use the term b'nai mitzvah, which is the kind of gender neutral children of the mitzvah. But it's the idea of you become a child who's completely dependent to becoming someone who earns certain rights and also takes on certain responsibilities and has a certain amount of feeling of, wow, I matter. And I become a full-fledged member of the congregation, of the community, of the people. And with that come responsibilities to answer the call of whatever that is. And then also the privilege to have influence, to have a voice.
That's great. Being here in Atlanta, Georgia, I have a shul right down the street from me, and my neighborhood is booming. And the shul just expanded in size. And my neighbors, it's great. They're all walking to services on Saturday and Friday evening. And some parents talk about that it can, they have to book their synagogue or shul 2 years in advance for the date, at least here in Atlanta. But so we've talked online that it's not necessarily a 2-year buildup, but can you give us a gestalt and of the major things the child's going to do. They're gonna connect with the cantor or the rabbi and that kind of thing. Uri.
Yeah, sure. So, I think as we spoke before, there's a range of ways this can go. We'll go through the traditional path, but I want to emphasize at the outset that none of this is written in stone, literally or figuratively.
Mm-hmm.
This is not part of the 10 commandments that this is the way it has to go. And I love that I can also offer your listeners the translation of your use of the Yiddish word shul. Some might not be familiar. That's the colloquial Yiddish term for the synagogue. So your temple, your synagogue, your shul. Typically, the bar mitzvah entails some sort of ceremonial, quote unquote, performance where you might be called up to lead the services as a guest cantor, singing, chanting, leading the congregation in services. You may also read from the Torah. It may be the tradition that you read a rather long set of portions, 7 or 8 portions of the Torah. Torah is interesting because when you read it inside, there's no vowels, and it's all in a specific font that is the traditional font that dates back thousands of years, but it's not the font that Hebrew is written in or printed today. So you have to know how to read this font and also know everything. The only thing that's there is the consonants. You don't have the vowels and you don't have the music, the sheet music. So it's a performance of sorts that requires a certain amount of preparation for any young person, but certainly standing in front of the congregation and being the person who's reading and chanting the Torah portion, or the portion after the Torah called the Maftir or the Haftorah, and then perhaps leading services and perhaps delivering a speech called the Dvar Torah. Certainly we can start to think for any young child, this is a nerve-wracking experience, potentially. For any family, it's a decision of how much they want to put their kid up to. And they don't want their kid to be any different than anyone else, but they also don't want to burden the kid. And then like you said, there's often the pairing of the child with a rabbi or with a cantor who helps the child prepare whatever portion they're going to be doing. So now the child is meeting a stranger. Hopefully it's a warm person who's connected and knows how to work with kids. Not always, but that's another layer of how this experience is kind of loaded. And as you said, it kind of spills back in time from the child's birthday and actual bar mitzvah ceremony, but it's actually months of preparation with a whole new team of people in his life or her life.
So learning the language, how to read it, as you mentioned, how difficult the font might be, and there's going to be speaking in English, in Hebrew. There's going to be canting, all of this. You have visitors coming in from all over America in non-pandemic times, maybe some from outside of the United States. So we can all surmise that there can be a big emotional buildup for these children. And if you stutter, you can have stuttering in English, stuttering in Hebrew, and a lot of children are very anxious about how they're going to perform. What are some thoughts you have on getting those children ready? Now we're focusing on kids who stutter and kids who do have some anxiousness about it and they are stuttering in English and or in Hebrew when they're reading. We know canting is a slam dunk in most cases. Singing, you don't stutter. So what kind of thoughts do you have for helping these children get emotionally ready if they're a kid who stutters?
Yeah, well, I think the first thought or the first thing that's coming up for me is the same thing that you described. I'm just getting nervous listening to you describe it, you know? And I think for a lot of parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, it's almost like for some people, and this is not the intention of what it's supposed to be, but it's kind of like, I was there, I walked on those coals, now it's your turn. And, you know, grandpa made me do it, now I'm passing on this. That is never what it was intended to be, and that shouldn't be the memory that stays with the child. So I think the first thing I want to keep highlighting is it's a challenging life cycle event, especially for kids who stutter, and that's why we're having this conversation. But if you're listening and this is relevant to you in any way, to recognize it's a lot of open variables. And the only thing that matters is the child turns that age and feels a certain turning of a page. There's no necessity for any singular one of the things that we've described.
Mm-hmm.
One can do one and not the other. But if they do none of them, they still become a bar mitzvah. They still earn their stripes and become a bat mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like this performance is what transforms them. But with that being said, I think before even thinking about the stuttering, I think we want to think about the child's temperament.
Mm-hmm.
I think we want to find a way to talk about performance anxiety, social anxiety, the feelings that are coming up, as well as with anything, why would anyone put themselves through this if there wasn't some payoff, if there wasn't some benefit, if there wasn't some purpose?
Mm-hmm.
So before even touching the stuttering, I would want to take stock of, what do I know about this child? And what do I know about this child's temperament? Is this child someone who just goes into things, is fearless, and is like a Timex watch and just bounces back, keeps on ticking, takes a licking and keeps on ticking? Or is this a sensitive child? Is this a child who is going to be in a rut leading up to the event, is going to despise the event and have all kinds of traumatic memories of this event? So I think once we take that into consideration, we want to find a way to talk about that. We want to find a way to negotiate that, navigate that, engage the child in the conversation, in the negotiation of what they want this to look like, and give the child options. One of the most important things, I think, is the freedom of choice. It's one of the tenets of Judaism, is that every person at every stage of their life has free will. And so when you're under peer pressure, cheat, to steal, to do drugs, you have a choice. It's a challenging thing, and none of us can protect our kids from never being challenged. But we want to raise our kids to have free will and to know how to exercise that muscle. So I think no less with this. I think for the child to know, look, we want you to have a wonderful bar mitzvah experience and to feel good about it today, feel good about it 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And so it's an opportunity for parents and educators to make it meaningful and not be stuck in thinking that things that are really open variables are closed variables, because everything's open and everything's on the table. And I shared with you, I'm an ordained Orthodox rabbi. So I'm speaking from the point of view as a stuttering specialist, but also as an Orthodox Jew with familiarity with all the different observances of Judaism and types of Jews out there. Everything is on the table. So creative ideas include, and I think it's important to put out there for every child, we don't have to do this. We could do like a family trip. We could do some project. We can do nothing at all about this performance. We could do it in our backyard. We could do it in a hotel or in a hall where it's just our friends and family, or we can do it in the congregation. We can do it live, or we can do a recorded presentation that's played back later, so you don't have that live pressure. We can do it with the full regalia. We can do a trimmed back version, but negotiating that, letting the child know that, instead of it feeling like it's thrust upon the child, but the child makes a choice, it changes everything. So I think the first thing is to engage the child, to know who you're dealing with. One of the tenets of Judaism, it's an old educational principle. Today it's called, individualized education. The Jewish principle is educate each child in his or her way. And so you have to know the child. There's no one way. That's something that's in the Talmud already. So I think it applies no less to this situation. Figure out who you're dealing with. Who's the child? What's going to be the most impressive and lasting experience that they could have? Raise the bar, but not so high that it's going to break them, but not so low that it doesn't challenge them. It should be a page-turning moment, but it shouldn't be a traumatic one.
Yes, those are great points. Temperament is really important. What I really like you're saying is talk to your child. What's their comfort level? Sometimes I think the parent has expectations for the fluency of the child during the ceremony that might be beyond the reach of the child. And it's important to talk with the parent. Let's pretend the parent really is, I want my son or daughter to be basically fluent during this day. A great question is, what do you believe if they stutter, or what would it mean to you if they stutter during the ceremony? To ascertain why it's such a priority to the mother or father for them to stick the landing, to nail it, to get the gold medal of fluency. And because that's a factor too, and that energy can filter down to the child.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I love what you're saying about empower the child and the parents to talk together. Where are you? We're 3 months out, or six months out, where are you? How do you feel? And that they can, as you said, they can negotiate and they have some choices, which really is empowerment. You also use the term life cycle event, right? And I think what you're saying, and I would agree as a person who stutters, we would never want the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah to be a negative life cycle moment, because there was such a buildup to speaking perfectly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a big moment. It's a big moment. And every big moment is fraught with risk, but with risk, there's reward. And it's an uncomfortable moment, but every uncomfortable moment is a moment to step outside your comfort zone and expand and grow bigger. So I think we want to set young people up for success. And obviously, Tim, you hit it on the head. You know, we don't want to set up if it's performed with fluency, you nailed it, success, we're proud of you. You should feel good about yourself. And if you don't, we're not going to say it, but you know it and we know it. We're disappointed. We're embarrassed. This is gonna be something they're going to talk about. That would be the worst possible thing we can imagine. So for the child who stutters, who knows what he's up for, what she's up for, I think it's important that this be one of many. If it's this moment that brings the family to that conversation, Tim, where the parents really do their work of processing. What does it mean to them, and what do they really wish for? Because nobody should be set up for a flawless performance is a win, and anything shy of that is a big failure. And whether that's said or not said, as you said, it's not that it might come across to the kid. It absolutely is transmitted to the kid. So I think that this needs to be a family affair.
That's beautiful. With counseling skills, we can ask a parent, like I said, some of the great questions, would be, what would it mean to you if your child stutters during the event, or what do you believe about it? That allows you to go vertical into their thought processes. And the wrong way to approach it is to say, sir, ma'am, take the pressure off the kid, where you lecture the parent. The art of therapy, and this is a therapeutic moment with the family, with parents and the child, is to find out what we call frames about stuttering. And once you open up the frames, the beliefs, the meaning attached to stuttering, then you can make progress in helping the parent to reframe their thinking about being perfect or not. And as you said, this goes beyond bars and bots. This is stuttering in general, the child who has to do his Scouts presentation as an Eagle Scout. So we always want to find out, what are your thoughts about your son or daughter stuttering? That's how you make progress. Wonderful. So there is potential anxiety. I've heard from children right from the mouth of babes. Things such as, my grandparents have always been concerned about my stuttering, and they're flying in for it. And so, in our industry, we talk about the ability to use CBT to help the child to reduce his or her anxiety. Do you have any tips on that? So the child is telling you that they're feeling a lot of anxiety and fear.
Yeah. We got to make room. We got to hold space. I think, as you said, and as I said before, I think we think of a family affair as like a party. Often there is also sometimes a party, sometimes it's the parents' party and the kid just has a couple friends there. It's a family affair. But I think that, as you said, this is really a watershed moment. As much as it's fraught with anxiety, we've got to get all the stakeholders on board, and it's a real chance to build allies. Allies with
like that.
The rabbi, the cantor, whoever's involved on that side of the picture. But within the family, yeah, if mom and dad are kind of like feeling the heat themselves, and this is kind of bringing to the surface a moment where they've been raising this young person in whatever way they've been dealing with the stuttering, and to some degree it's been a bit more private. This is the moment that it's all coming to a head, so to speak. And I think as anxious as the child can be, I think it's bringing up a lot for parents. And sometimes parents are nervous about their own parents coming in and what they bring in. So I think, as you said, really engaging that. I'll share one story, which I also think is a good story to share with these kids. My dad and I work with people from all over the world and all sorts of people, but we also get some people from the Jewish community. Not sure why. I haven't figured out why, but we seem to get a bunch.
Just an internet search. Just a
weird
random
thing. It's a weird thing. Maybe, I guess it's Atlanta and New York, a lot of Jews. But my dad had this Hasidic kid that came to him for a while. And then they came in with the parents, and the parents said, he's like 18, 19, says, "Doc, do you think he's ready?" My dad said, "Ready for what?" They're like, "Do you think he's ready? Ready for shidduchim," which is like the marriage process, the dating, arranged dating. And my dad says, "I don't know. I'm not a shadchan. I'm not a matchmaker. I'm a speech therapist." So they said, "Well, you know how it goes. The standards, got to have a speech and everything. And if there's anything, everyone nitpicks." So my dad said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask your son?" Turns to the boy and says, "Do you feel ready for that stage, for that next moment in life?" Kid says, "Well, I feel as ready as my friends, pretty ready. I'm a little nervous, but my friends are also ready and nervous. So I guess I'm ready." So my dad turns to the parents. Parents says, "Moishi seems ready." Parents said, "No, but you don't understand, Doc. We have this other family and there's this young woman and she's remarkable, but they say she's so picky. It's as if she's waiting for Moses to come down from the mountain and scoop her up." My dad says, "Perfect, Moishi." That's Moses in Yiddish pronunciation. Moses, Moishi. Hey, your son has the same name. He also has a stutter. She's waiting for Moses to come down and pick her up. It's a match made in heaven. So they say, "Doc, oh, I don't know." So my dad says, "Well, Moishi, do you want to marry a girl that doesn't know that you stutter, or that doesn't tolerate that you stutter?" He says, "No." "Do you want to marry a family where the family doesn't know that you stutter, doesn't tolerate that you stutter?" He says, "No, that wouldn't be too much fun." So my dad says, "So I got an idea. Why don't you go out with this girl and just put it on the table and let her know, this is how I talk. It's not up here, and it's not a problem in confidence. I'm ready to be a great husband, a person who can support this family and raise kids and do great things together. What do you want to ask? You can ask me anything." Long story short, that was on Friday. And shortly thereafter, the kid left his first voicemail ever, telling my dad he's invited to the engagement party. Comes back to the office a few weeks later. My dad says, "How'd it go?" Kid says, "Well, you wouldn't believe it, Doc. I did what you said." And it turns out she said to me she had dated all these other guys, but she felt they were putting on a show. They were hiding something. I was authentic and present and honest. Wow. And she found it refreshingly attractive. And so the idea of being open and having these conversations in presence of the kid, in support of the kid, is just the way to go. And the same is true with bar and bat mitzvahs. If you look at Moses as a prototype, my father says Moses at the burning bush was the first episode of speech therapy. We've got Wendell Johnson, Van Riper, we've got all our forefathers in stuttering therapy, but go back to God at the burning bush. Just from a literary point of view, the Old Testament, he's standing there and Moses says, "I'm not a man of words. I'm not your guy." God says, No. I am the giver of words. I got this. You're my guy. You're going to do this. And Moses goes on to become the greatest leader and teacher in world history. So I think these are good stories to share with young people. I think connecting them with mentors and people who've gone through this before them. And I think for parents to know that this is a high stakes. You can You can ally with your kid and they'll remember it forever, or you can put your expectations above all, and your kid will always be left with that traumatic moment, perhaps.
That's deep. Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever, and I have, had a situation where I have a child in front of me who stutters, and one of the parents has a history of stuttering. And there's an expression in therapy, the map is not the territory. And sometimes the parent wants to put their map on the territory. Maybe the parent nailed it and their child has to nail it, or vice versa. The parent really had difficulty at their bar bot and they're freaking out that their child might. That puts a unique twist on things, just like in stuttering therapy in general. When you have a parent of a child who stutters and the parent stutters, and depends where they are on their recovery, if we can use that word, whether the parent still presents with a marked stuttering problem or extraordinarily mild. But anyway, I know we could go for 30 minutes on that, but just, have you encountered a parent who stutters, who's getting their child ready for their bar bot, and you need to intervene and help?
Yeah. Many. I think the key there is, as you said, I like that phrase, not putting the map on the territory. You know, I try to tell the parent, I say, look, I'm interested in hearing about what your journey was and what your experience was, what you learned from it and how you grew from it, or how you paid for it, where you stand today, and what you wish would have happened. And I try to tell them, look, it is not going to be helpful or productive for you to displace your best hopes of what you would have wished for yourself, or you did have and worried you wouldn't have had, and displace that on your kid. But you can leverage your experience, as good or as challenging as it was. You can leverage that to be a better parent for this child, and to be more informed and understand what it means to stand in their shoes more than I can, or more than a parent that doesn't stutter. So I would try to pull back the frame, bringing back to what you said, very practical point. You said, you know, sometimes parents are worried about booking this Shabbat when the kid's first born. They're already contacting the synagogue to book the calendar 13, 12 years out. So number one, I would say, is for parents to recognize realistically, how much lead time do we need? And let's just cut that lead time as much as possible. There's no reason anybody needs to be in a high state of angst for longer than necessary. So as far as I'm concerned, most bar and bat mitzvahs can be prepared for within 10 months. And that's generous. So I think if there's already a feeling of it's on the radar for the child, even if it's unspoken, it's on the radar for the parents, I think putting it on the table and discussing, when do we need to start freaking out? And until then, can we just not freak out? Put it on the calendar. This is the freak out period. Okay. Until then, we agree not to freak out. That's number one.
I like that.
So kind of, you could save like a good 12 months of freak out by just talking about that. Number two, I think on the other end is, as you're leading up to it, you're deciding, what is this going to look like? How much are they taking on? How much are they going to do in the synagogue on that day? I think talking about, what do we want the day after to look like? What story do we want to tell the day after?
I like that.
How do we stack that for success? So for the parents, my dad has the saying, he says, we're not looking to raise happy 12 and 13-year-old kids. We're looking to raise young people who can become independent, self-sufficient adults. So what kind of experience can we have today that's going to be one that's going to build the bricks and plant the seeds of that well-adjusted adult, as opposed to the perfect looking 12, 13-year-old performance? And I think that shifts things, because when you explore that with the parents, what do you really hope for your child to remember from this experience? Well, I want them to feel that they could do it. I don't want them to feel like we tapped them out, or they tapped out themselves and will forever, shy away. I want them to feel they matter. I want them to feel like they grew up. They're not little kids anymore. So when you get to that level, that's when I think you start to have the principles and values with which as you said, to navigate the territory with some navigational intelligence based on values and principles instead of previous stories or expectations from their own family history or from the community.
Yeah, in therapy, some people are familiar with a therapeutic pattern called the miracle question pattern. You can do a search under the miracle question pattern, and pages and pages and pages will come up. But you just mentioned basically the premise that you go to the day after. It's the day after, and how do we know that our child has had a really good experience? What would be the evidence of that? What would he or she see, hear, and feel that would indicate that that child that just had their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah feels really wholesome, that they are at peace at how well they did? So you describe that, then you look back. So the miracle question pattern is a process in therapy that invites the parents to go to the day after and look back, or the child.
I have two quick stories, Tim, on bar mitzvah boys. Can I share?
Yeah. On
that point, just two quick ones. Number one, I would be remiss if I didn't squeeze in my favorite kid, Jonathan Costello. Jonathan Costello lives in Connecticut, and he made a video that went viral just a couple of years ago. So if you look up Jonathan Costello, if you go on our blog page, schneiderspeech.com, viral video, he made a remarkable public service announcement about stuttering. And that was part of his mitzvah project, good deed project of raising awareness. And it got onto the local news, and he got all the way up to President Biden reaching out to him and inviting him into his inner circle. So Jonathan Costello is just an example of leaning in to making this bar mitzvah something meaningful. In his case, he literally, totally leaned in and made the stuttering the focus. And then Michael Lieben is one more example. Michael Lieben appears in the Transcending Stuttering film and in Going with the Flow. Today, he's an assistant DA in Brooklyn as a person who stutters and rising, married father, awesome fellow. And at his bar mitzvah, he gave a speech, and he stood there, and my father happened to be at his side. And at some point, he pushed my father away from the podium and continued to stutter his way through the speech. And he said the following story. He said, in all of our lives, we have fences. This is my fence. And standing here giving the speech is what I'm doing about it. What's your fence? And what are you doing about it? A few weeks later, he comes into the office and he quits therapy. He says, I think I'm done. My dad says, what's up? He says, well, reaches into his pocket, takes out fan mail, envelopes, not with bar mitzvah checks, but with letters and cards. I didn't speak to my mom over something stupid for 15 years. I was at your bar mitzvah speech, and it made me think I need to do something about my fence. Story after story. So the moment of the speech or of this rite of passage is really about becoming a person of influence. And so anything, whether it's about the stuttering or some other way of expressing their individuality and their voice, can be a very special thing to point and lean into.
The metaphor of the fence is deep. In some of the therapy I do, when you ask somebody to close their eyes and create an image of what their stuttering looks like, a lot of people have brought up an image of a wall. And then, so the fence metaphor is great too. That's a great story. Just very quickly, we talked a lot about emotional preparation and partnering with the synagogue or shul and parents and everything. There is a speech therapy technique called phrasing that you and I know what it is. For anyone listening, it appeared in the King's Speech, King George VI and Logue the therapist, the original speech where King George VI joined the wiping out of Hitler. That speech is in the archives of Great Britain. So the movie was true to the fact that Logue, the therapist, did in fact encourage King George VI to break his speech into chunks. We call it phrasing. Joe Biden and Jill Biden were at the theater circa 2011 watching the King's speech. There's an article in People magazine in 2011 where Biden talks about, he goes, Jill, that's exactly what they taught me to do. They had me read out loud in school. These were nuns at the time. They had me read out loud with phrasing just like that. Then they put me in the mirror and they had me recite poetry using phrasing, something like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. If anyone has any concerns about, is that natural? Listen to James Earl Jones, who's a person who stutters. Barack Obama has the chunking of words down to a science. Morgan Freeman, maybe the highest paid voice in the world, and Matthew McConaughey, if you listen to his advertisements now for Lincoln. Anyways, coming back to phrasing, phrasing is a tried and true strategy for oral reading. So the kids who are doing the English portion, I just helped the last bar mitzvah I was at was May of 19. This was a kid who was very juiced up with anxiety, worked with the family. Anyways, his charity was to raise money for childhood cancer by swimming in the lake. Long distances, lake swimming to raise money for charity for cancer. He did a great job. And the English portion was marked into phrasing. And he read it out loud and he got real familiar with it. The day of, he read it. It had lines in it, just like King George the Sixth and Joe Biden. And he did a fantastic job. In the reading part of Hebrew, we know that the text goes from right to left, English left to right. Where I need the parents and someone to scrub in is I don't speak the language. And there's nuances in stressing different sounds. Some children I've worked with have had trouble with the H, the H, that you can do better than I do. But do you have any thoughts for us on using a tempo, using phrasing, left to right English, right to left in Hebrew, Uri?
Yeah. First of all, it's fascinating you said that, because today I was listening on YouTube to a collection of the King's speeches, the actual speeches, because John T. Claypole just came out with a book called Words Fail Us. And he talks about the fact that there's more to the story than what we see in the movie, but I'll leave that to the listeners to check that out. But in that, and the other thing that's fascinating is I also referenced that People magazine in 2011. In addition to the story, Tim, I'm sure you also have that image of his speech. Joe Biden shares an image of one of his speeches that he gave in China, and it has these slash marks throughout the speech. So to your point, I think it's important to also take away all the distracting things. The Hebrew doesn't matter. The right to left doesn't matter. Yeah. In fact, for anyone that understands this, or a cantor, you could tell your cantor to listen to this portion. Here's the hack. The hack is that whereas in English, one doesn't have commas at every single place where you might want to do phrasing, right? You kind of have to use your commanded language. Well, in the chanting, because the notes are there, not in the Torah, but when you're preparing it in a Bible, in a book, or in a tikkun, so the etznachta, the tipcha, zakev katon, tevir, there are certain symbols that can be a telltale sign of this is a good place for a comma. This is a good place for one of those Joe Biden slash marks. And so I would recommend that any cantor or family lean into that, take advantage. And that is one of a few, but definitely the pillar of techniques, tools, and hacks that I would recommend for anyone that's preparing something like this, is to put these slash marks so that instead of it being a sprint.
Yes.
And, I forgot to mention, besides that the Torah has no vowels and no music notes, there's no periods. No periods. So you got to know. It's
so easy to learn, I'm sure.
A piece of cake. What could go wrong for anybody? Not to mention the kid who has a little bit of dyslexia or a little bit of performance anxiety or language learning disability, or maybe stutters. But the fact of the matter is, with all those things present, a kid can still nail it. And so we have to give that child that opportunity if they choose to. But to your point, in the chanting of it, the melody has built-in symbols that are tried and true things that can be leveraged as distinct places, whether you understand what you're reading or not. Those are the markers. That's number one. And number two, for motivational purposes, some 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds are very mature. Some are very not yet mature. So I've had parents with that dilemma of how to motivate the child. And in some cases where it's appropriate, or with some who are actually have other developmental challenges, let's say. So they really are not of the maturation or developmental stage of a typical 12, 13-year-old, whether it's to give them a quarter for every pause or give them $1 for every pause, depending on what motivates them. That has been something that I've done with those who are not your typical neurotypical kiddos.
The map is not the territory, you know.
There you go.
You have
so
to
those
be
are
creative
some hacks.
and nimble.
That's right. Flexible and adapt to the kid. It goes back to teach the child, create experiences for the child that are fitting for this child, not for your other kid or for the other child in the congregation.
I personally find a mirror to be absolutely powerful. And this is all, you know, anyways, Biden talks about the mirror. Bob Love, who played for the Chicago Bulls, his videos show him speaking in the mirror. It's extraordinarily powerful to prepare for public speaking, to watch yourself do it. 2/3 of everything we learn comes in through our eyes, all week, every week. So the mirror provides that biofeedback, real-time biofeedback. I remember coming out of graduate school, and I had an exacerbation of stuttering that literally took me back to high school stuttering. Just to make this real quick, I came out of graduate school in 1992, and I had a master's degree in speech pathology, which meant from that point on, I could never stutter again, because my industry is the world's authority on talking. We're better talkers than attorneys, politicians, and news anchors, because we're the authorities on talking. So I had my brain convinced. I developed.
In case you can't pick up the sarcasm, just
yeah. Thank you. I hope folks can. So I literally blew. And calling physicians, for example, this is Tim Mackesy. I'm a speech pathologist. The job title was a huge trigger for me. Anyways, doing self-therapy on myself with CBT and then mirror work, I was able to nail my phone calls with physicians and nurses. But that's just a quickie story, the power of the mirror.
I got one thing I just want to say about mirrors. Number one, I don't typically go to the mirror, but I'm listening and I'm hearing how powerful it can be. But I would also say, you know, like any powerful tool, it should be done with caution, because sometimes listening to oneself or seeing oneself can be very powerful, but also impressionable in a way that one might not be ready for.
Like you said, you're partnering and you're forming an alliance. So the question would be to the child, would you like to try it? It's
giving them the option.
It's a tool in our toolbox.
So the story, I just got a message from the same person I wanted to mention. So how cool is that? It's like 10 years later, his bar mitzvah, instead of giving a speech in real time at the party, he recorded a montage. So it was pre-recorded, and he did all this cool video editing 10 years ago. So it wasn't so common. So the feedback afterwards wasn't like, oh, wow, you usually stutter so bad. That was so good. You made it through the speech. No, people were like, wow, I didn't fall asleep. People actually appreciated that it was more engaging. It was more valuable than typical speech. And they actually didn't notice the perfection or imperfection in what they expected from what is expected cadence or fluency. So again, being creative is so clutch. So these are all true stories of families leaning into their young people to do things that are bold and courageous and different, but ultimately coming out of the experience stronger for it.
I love that. Yeah. And I said to you offline, when I meet a boy or a girl, I absolutely do not put out a goal. Let's get this so that this child is, 100% fluent during that is not me, man. Not with my own history of stuttering. I have found the phrasing, like this young man back in May of 2019, the rabbi and some elders said, we've never heard a better one. It's not just, it wasn't about stutter or not stutter. What it was about was the clarity. I've never heard a better one because he used his phrasing like I am now. It was the clarity that made it easy for the elderly people and so forth to understand, because as you mentioned, some kids can get up there and hit download all. They're on fiber internet, right? Just streaming to get it over with. But anyways.
And Tim, I want to highlight also what you mentioned. The list of people included people who stutter, but also the Barack Obamas, the Martin Luther Kings, and others who use that cadence as masterful communicators, not to compensate, but rather to just be world-class communicators. So when we're offering phrasing, and maybe why it went off so nicely is that it's two birds in one stone. Great orators use this technique. And so when it benefits speech as well, it only, ups the level of the performance and of the communication.
Right. The reason why all those people you mentioned, it's persuasive speaking. It's easy for the listener to absorb and consume, and it uncorks the voice like a Morgan Freeman. It releases the voice when you break the words into chunks. So right now, with the pandemic, a lot of the children who are unable to stream electronics on a Saturday, what I'm hearing, some of my kiddos here, and I'm hearing from others, is they're doing a recorded on Thursday to be broadcast to friends and family all around. And then on Saturday, maybe doing a small service with distancing. Some of them are doing it outdoors to make it safe for these small groups. So we could have two responsibilities as their coach, preparing them for the recording of something, for example, on a Thursday, and then a live performance for a small audience on Saturday. And I think we kind of covered how to do that, right?
Yeah, I think the key is being value driven and identifying for the family as a unit. How can the family, instead of coming at each other's throats over this event, really come together, band together? And I think in some ways, this pandemic has created all kinds of challenges of health and of wellness and of people's livelihood. There's all kinds of struggle and suffering going on. But at the same time, for some kids, they've actually been enjoying the time. I have one of my kids enjoying more so the time at home, and kids who stutter telling me they enjoy more time where they can talk when and where they want, with whom they want. So there is an upside to these smaller ceremonies. So I think when we're driven by the values as opposed to the product, I think we have much more success. Yeah.
Value driven, man. I'm going to store that to my cranium. Love that. How rewarding is it for you to be involved in bars and bots?
I don't think we have time for me to go. It's beyond words. I mean, this week alone, and I posted it to our blog page, there was a young man who came to me. It wasn't a bar mitzvah, it was getting engaged. Came to me, his confidence in himself was a 0. And he self-described it as such. Previous pseudo-therapist told him to connect the right brain to the left brain. He needs to crawl on the floor at age 18, 15 minutes a day, you should crawl on the floor. Well, if you had any confidence left before that, and now you're told to crawl on the floor, I'd say that would knock every ounce of confidence out of you.
Jeez.
So he, in a couple months, and this is not a testimony of myself, but more of an expression of the human spirit.
Yeah.
He worked on himself and described as follows. He said, I had a very strong stutter, but I came to appreciate 85% of my experience with my stutter. 85% of it was on the inside, how crummy it made me feel, how anxious it made me feel, how scared I was to raise my voice or even say a word to a bus driver. 15% of it was the struggle of the physical, getting my words out above the tip of the iceberg. He says the 85%, today the 85% is finished. I still got stuttering. It's much better than it was. It's much easier than it was. But my point to you is to dance at his engagement party, which was distanced, outdoors, small gathering. but to know that it meant the world to him, that he could stand in that place when a year prior, he didn't want to get engaged to his own self because he felt so crummy about himself, but he discovered the diamond within. He polished the diamond. He realized how brilliant he is, how worth it he is, and he's in the process of writing his book, his story, which will be published.
One of the themes we're talking about is he is more than stuttering.
That's right.
Every one of these children getting ready for their Bat Mitzvah, they are more than stuttering, and it is more than stuttering. I want to do a feature podcast with you that is specific to the concept of transcending stuttering, and you're going with the flow. And I was wondering if you would do that with me.
It would be a great honor. And just to give credit to my father, Dr. Phil Schneider, really for filming his work from the beginning through decades, 40 years. And so you see true real life stories of people grow up in front of your eyes, and Transcending Stuttering is the first one. Going with the Flow is the sequel. That would be an honor, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. So you have clinics in New York State?
New York and New Jersey, and we're licensed in some other states and working also in Israel, and training therapists in this idea of transcending stuttering. So essentially it means
to get into your schedule.
To transcend.
Yeah.
No, please, Tim. You know that you're as busy as anybody. It's more of an honor that to have this time to share the time with you and to share the mic and to share ideas and to be enriched by each other's wisdom. It's a privilege. But I think transcending stuttering, I would leave everybody with the question, what does that mean to you? What could that mean? Because I think I don't stutter, but I get so much from that. It's no less applicable to me than it is to a person who stutters, no less applicable to a parent.
Yes.
So I think thinking about that, because it was a very deliberate choice when my father titled it in 2004, and it's as relevant today as it was then.
Yes.
So transcending stuttering.
There's no cure for stuttering. If a person who stutters can transcend it, and I'm eager to dig into the themes that are within the title and the deeper things of stuttering, the iceberg of stuttering. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. And this is the Bar Mitzvah, Bat Mitzvah, your sage advice. The topic, in my opinion, served as a metaphor of something a lot bigger, of this alliance with a family. If I'm 12 or 13 years old and stuttering bugs me, to communicate with my parents, my siblings, maybe my teachers, my coach, my camp counselor. When summer camps happen, and I always advocate and educate before the child goes and spends 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6, 8 weeks at a summer camp, because it can be a good life cycle experience, or it can go sideways. I remember going to summer camp as a kid who stutters and it being identified immediately. And sometimes it was an easy target for kids. So a big takeaway from this that's resonating with me is that your ideas of aligning with the family, almost looking beyond the event, knowing it's a success. So how about this? When I send my kid to college, when I help move my child into the dormitory, he's going to have to introduce himself, go into small group discussions, do the intro, public speaking, maybe rush a fraternity or sorority, whatever they're into. Have I helped that child be ready to transcend into independence at a university setting? Have I done that? The choices I make now with the 12 and 13-year-old, are they congruent and ecological with creating that adult that's independent?
Yeah, exactly. And I would add that I think the biggest mistake that everyone falls into as professionals in this picture and as parents, we feel that we have the responsibility to make the right decision, and we are worried that we will make the wrong one. So if we give the kid a pass, we think we're going to put them into a life of kind of always stepping away. And if we push them up there, we're worried that we're pushing them up and going to traumatize them. And if we do the other, we feel like we're shortchanging them. We feel damned if we do, damned if we don't. And I think the way to get out of that is to engage the young person. in whatever way is developmentally appropriate, to give them agency and choice in this, and to find a way to talk about the elephant in the room. And in doing so, instead of it being this frightening and damaging experience, it can be one of the most fortifying, catapulting growth experiences for this young person and for the family.
Love that. Thank you for your time this morning. This has been even better than I imagined.
I've enjoyed it as much and more than I thought I would. I thank you for this opportunity. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you very much.